What's going on, everybody? We're back again. How you doing? I'm Jay, and we are here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. I was going to say morning, but it's not really morning right now. And thanks for tuning in. And if you happen to be catching on the replay, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments and you're watching the replay, drop them in the comments down below. If you're here with us live, thanks for tuning in. And if you have any questions or comments, put those in the comments right over here. So what's going on, everyone? Today I wanted to do a little bit of a live stream and put out this video because my friend Matt, who, if you've seen the video of the weekend with the Flare 58 that came out on Saturday, you will have noticed that, well, that's Matt, right? And so Matt calls me up this morning and he says to me, hey man, he has a little bit of a problem. And he's like, hey, I just did a sample of these beans. Why would some be way darker than the others? And if we look at him closely, you can see that in this picture, we've got some coffees that are like, here, that are kind of dark looking, right? Like these, this one, and some of them, and they're kind of uneven. And my first reaction was like, okay, that's probably a density thing, right? If the beans are not a uniform density, then there could be problems where they will just have this kind of miscoloration. However, I was thinking that it's also a natural processed coffee. And typically, the natural processed coffee will have these things we call Quakers or floaters, which are lower density beans that kind of float if you put it in water. But they typically have lighter colors than most of the roasts. So he was like, let me bring it over for you to try. I said, oh, well, I think that's what I said to him. The ultimate test is to taste it. So I said, hey man, why don't you bring it over and let's have a taste. So he sent me some stuff. He brought it over, and we actually had a tasting of this coffee earlier today. And as we're talking about it, I was thinking, oh man, I should have done this as a live stream with him and with the coffee and with everyone. Then I thought, why don't I just make a live stream now, and we'll just review the coffee as it is. And so for those of you who may not be familiar, when you're looking for coffees for your coffee program, you'll go out to, whether you're dealing with an importer or you're dealing with a wholesaler of some sort, exporter of some kind, or directly with the farmer, you will always want to get some kind of sample of the coffees that you're considering. And they'll give you these green samples. And I'm sure this one is going to go back here. They'll give you the green samples, and you can then roast it and then taste it and evaluate the coffee yourself. And that's pretty much what Sammy did. He went to the supplier. And I mean, that's what Matt did. He went to the supplier and was like, hey, I'm interested in your coffee, your wash coffee, and can you give me a sample? So that, of course, standard industry practice is to give you a sample of the coffee. You take it back to your roasting facility, you roast it up, you evaluate it, and then you can decide from there, is this a coffee that I want to use in our coffee program? And from that point, you negotiate the price and all that kind of thing. So the coffee we're dealing with today is actually from El Salvador, and it's what's called the Monte Verde. Monte Verde is a town in the Santa Ana departamento of El Salvador. It's in the western part of Salvador, close to the border with Guatemala. It's a really great growing region. I work with a couple of farmers in that area, as well as a couple of different milling stations in that area. I'm not too familiar with Monte Verde. I mean, there's quite a few, so it's very difficult for any one buyer to know everybody and every place to get coffee. And it's supposed to be quite a good coffee. Like the importer rates it at 86.5 on the scale of 100, up to 100. So it's supposed to be excellent quality coffee. And I've actually put all of the details regarding the coffee in the show notes below in case you want to see it. Grown at 1,450 meters above sea level. It is Bourbon and Pacas variety coffee. And what else do we have? 18 days of drying. So I don't know if that's it's unspecific as to what kind of drying. So it could be, a mixture of patio drying with guardiolas, mechanical forced heat drying. But 18 days, I'm suspecting that it's probably mostly patio, but it doesn't really provide that much detail. And so in this particular sample bag, they gave 200 grams of coffee. Now, if you ever do actual SCA critical cuppings like that for either the SCA or for Q grading, you're actually supposed to have 350-gram samples. So the 200-gram samples is a little bit short. The nice thing about 350-gram samples is that you can do 50 or 100-gram sample batches, roast that much of it, and you can have upwards of 3 total batches to play with. And if you need to do one, if you do one roast, you make a mistake, you still have 200 more grams. Here, you have less. It just gives you more flexibility. Plus, also, Matt decided to roast the entire sample, so it just, if there are issues with the way that you roast, then you don't really have any more sample to roast with. That's why you normally do 100 grams, and typically you're going to do enough roasting to cover your sample size. And what that means is that we will take the industry standard to take cups such as this, which are called cupping cups, and this is actually from the Consejo in El Salvador. I got this as a gift. That was very nice. Actually, I got a whole set of these, but I'm only using one today. And so we'll either use something like this, which is kind of like a little soup bowl, really, or we'll use these Gibraltar type of cocktail glasses. So I'm going to use one of each today. This one's going to be for rinsing. This is going to be for the actual tasting of the coffee. But you'll do upwards of 5 samples for a critical tasting. So if you're really looking to see, if you're buying directly from the farm and you're really like wanting to taste that coffee critically or evaluate in a very critical fashion, you'll use typically 5 samples of these with about 10 to 13 grams of coffee in each one. So for that case, you probably want to have at least 70 grams for your roast, each roast that you're doing for it, which means that if you have a 200-gram sample, you can do about 2 of those 5-cup cuppings. With 350 grams, you can do 3, maybe even 4 out of it, depending on how tight you make it. So it just gives you greater flexibility when you have the 350. Plus, it's also stipulated in the evaluation of the green coffee that it has to be 350 grams to give you a representative sample for the coffee that you are evaluating. But that's not really here nor there. We're not really looking at the green coffee. Well, we can't look at the green coffee because now it's all roasted. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the coffee itself first that's been roasted. And we've got our little tray here. As you can see, here's our tray. And the blue trays, they can be blue, they can be copper, they can be white. The blues I kind of like because it gives a nice contrast, especially when the coffee's in the green state. Right, so there we are. This is the coffee. And it's looking a little bit, I've got some incandescent lighting, some halogen lighting on the desk, so it gives it much more of a warmer tone. Let me turn on the regular big lights. There we go. That's a little bit more revealing. It doesn't have that nice glow of incandescence, so it's not as beautiful, but which gives us a lot more. So you can see there is some variation in the roasting. And I was asking Matt, like, how did you roast the coffee? And so he was like, well, let me show you the roast profile. And so if you look here, this is his roast profile. Again, he was roasting on the Alirio Bullet. And if you're familiar with the Alirio Bullet, it's an electric roaster that is 1 kilo in capacity. He's roasting 200 grams. So he's only at 20% of capacity, which isn't too bad. But he's still a new roaster, so he's still learning a lot of things about it. And we can look here at the curve. This is the readout from the Alirio. What they don't do on this, that kind of like I find a little bit irritating, is that it only starts, I guess the temperature probe only starts recording once it reaches a certain, like right almost at the turning point. I don't know why it does this. My system is a lot more rudimentary on my roasters because it always gives you raw data the whole time. So we always see the peak and then the drop. So the rate of drop and then the turn, and then we can see the rate of rise. Now, this, of course, is just a screen capture, so we're not getting all the interactivity that it would be with the app itself, and we can't really see all this. But he started, I think he said he started about 260 Fahrenheit or so, maybe, which I think is a bit low. Typically, we'll start closer to 300 on a single origin profile, whether we're doing, for most of the roasting, we'll probably start there. So I thought it was a little bit low. And as you can see, it's a pretty shallow slope. So that's indicative that it wasn't that high a temperature. And then as you can see, it comes all the way out to 8 minutes, which is overall time-wise, it's not that bad. And he finishes right around 360, I think it is. 300, no, here it is. 300, here, 300. Yeah, right around 360. I think he said it was 362 at that time. So first crack happened here at, what time is that interval? That's just past 6 minutes. So not too bad. A little bit, maybe a little bit earlier than we would like. We'd like to see it right close, more around the 8 or 9 minute mark. And here it's happening about 6:05, and the first crack happened at 218 degrees. My first cracks that I work with, whether I'm using the production roaster or our sample roaster, is a lot higher. And so I tend to roast samples, especially our start temperature, to be higher, right? I tend to do it more closer to our production style roast. And we're just kind of, using a different scale as far as the size of the roast batch. And so as you can see here, the coffee itself there's a little bit of unevenness. And I think that's probably because of this, it was probably a little bit long for itself. But that's kind of neither here nor there at the moment. We just see that there is some inconsistency. And a lot of things like this, it'll just take more time for you to just, if this is happening to you, it's just more about getting used to roasting more coffee. So it's all about time in the saddle and experience and trying and tasting. And one of the things I was telling Matt is, as you're working with these things, and let's say you're roasting over and over again, you always want to taste your batch. So what we try to do is we're always trying to pull samples from each batch of coffee. Even if it's part of a larger batch, we're taking a sample from every batch and we're cupping it. Or if you don't want to go through a formal cupping, you can also just taste the coffee. Just brew it however you like to brew it. The important part is to, be able to taste the coffee, see what you like about the coffee, see what you don't like about the coffee from that batch. And then you can look here and correlate that taste to your profile, right? So you could tell here, like, there's all this other data, and I don't, to be quite honest, my system's much more rudimentary. All I have is the temperature curve. These are things like rate of rise and all kinds of other stuff that I don't really use. IBTS temperature and, anyway, but the thing is that as you do your roast batches and you taste them, you learn. Like if you have this one batch and you're like, I don't really like the way that tasted. Like, I wonder what's wrong with it. And so you have one, the same coffee, right? So you have this one batch, you're like, oh, I love this one. This is fantastic. The next batch, you're like, oh, I don't really like that one. You can look at your roast profiles, these things, and they can tell you what you did wrong or what you did that was different. So when you see the profile of the one you really loved and you compare it to the one that you didn't love, you usually can see what the difference is. And then you can decide for yourself, okay, well, this is something I need to pay more attention to improve, and go from there. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this sample and we're going to, so many controls here to manage. So this, of course, is our coffee. We're going to take this, swap this out. We're going to put this down here. We're going to get our cupping cup, right? And now we're going to take our coffee. Now I've ground 13 grams of coffee. And let me just make it sure that you can see this. And the 13 grams of coffee are now in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to get our timer at the ready. And for this practice, what we're going to do is we're going to count upwards using our stopwatch. So we've got coffee just off the boil, and I'm going to pour it all in one fell swoop with making. So I'm going to pour it all in one motion while making sure that we saturate all of the coffee grounds and starting the timer. Okay, I'm right about there. Now, typically, you will you could use as much coffee or as little coffee as you want during this phase. I mean, ideally, we're using, like in this particular sample, we're using 13 grams. This is about a 9-ounce cup, and the key thing is that you're using a consistent vessel. So whether you're using this type of vessel or you're using this type of vessel, you always use them, and you can always be consistent. So if we're using this vessel and this vessel, or if we're using this vessel, we're always using 13 grams. So we're also going to use the same ratio. So this is about 10 grams here, because actually I think it is a little bit less. And so you're going to use the same quantity of coffee to water each time so that you're getting consistency, so that when you compare the coffees from batch to batch, you're also comparing apples to apples rather than something else, right? So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. The vessel and the vessel doesn't necessarily matter. What you want is something wide enough so that you can get a good nose in on it, and it's got enough so that you can stick your cupping spoon in and get a sample out of. That's really what is important. But after that, you just want to have a consistent amount of water to coffee. All right, so we're just going to let it run. And so what we're going to do is we're waiting for 4 minutes to happen, okay? So once 4 minutes comes, we're going to be able to break the coffee and, start to get closer to the tasting. So at this point, during the first 4 minutes, we're just going to smell the aromas coming off of the coffee. So get your nose like really down into it, right? And so you just think about what you get. Now you could do a whole, cupping, scoring thing, but today we're not going to do that. We're not going to bother with that, because that's not necessarily what we always need to do. We just want to evaluate. Essentially, at this point, it's really a question of, do you like it or not? Really, if you're running your own coffee program, and in a lot of respects, it's just really, do you like the coffee? Does the coffee fit to what you want? And that's true whether you're a roaster or evaluator that's working for a larger roasting company, or you're at home just roasting for yourself. It's really just a matter of like, does this coffee fit the criteria that I need? Whether that criteria is for, we need to make 70,000 pallets of this blend to send out to, Costco, or we just need, 2 pounds for the next week. That's really what it comes down to at a very simplistic level. All right, so we're getting closer. It's 3.5 minutes now, almost 3.5 minutes. Actually, I'm going to readjust some things here so that hopefully it won't spill. That would be not so fun. I'm going to move the camera, make sure that we're good here. How are we doing? Oh yeah, that's even better. Excellent. So if you're just joining us, thanks for joining us. We are evaluating some coffee from El Salvador that Matt received as a green sample, and he had some questions about the way that it was roasted and some of the properties about it. So he wanted me to give him some feedback on it. So he actually came over earlier, and we're just redoing this now. So this is the coffee, and we're now past 4 minutes. All right. 4 minutes. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to do what's called the break. And the break is really just about taking your coffee spoon and getting deep into the into the nose, right? Then your nose close. If your nose touches the cup, that's okay, right? That's kind of a sign that you're doing right. Everybody in the business has dunked their nose into the coffee at some point in their career. Most of us have done it multiple times, so it's nothing to be embarrassed about. So what you're going to do is the idea is you're going to take the spoon, you're going to push it down and push it away, right? And that's going to open the crust. Like there's this crust here that is, covering the coffee, and there are aromatics that are just kind of under the cap that want to get out. They want to release, right? So we're just going to release them, but we want to catch them. We want to catch them with our nose, right? So as we break and they start to escape, we want to really sniff really hard so that you get that, right? Got it? Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to break, push, or stick it in, push, open the break, and inhale the whole time, right? So let's do that. So I'm getting darker, roasty tones. The earlier I was getting diatomaceous kind of earth notes in the nose. These are all a little bit harsh, like especially this break had a lot of roasty bitterness in the nose. Not quite what I was hoping for in a coffee. I'm adding some water to that other cup so that we could have a little bit of rinsing, right? You have to want to have a rinsing thing here. Now, some of the things that come from the farm, let me just show you this. Did this come out? Will this work? Oops. Let me do this again. One day I'm going to actually have a production assistant that's going to be able to do a lot of the switching for me. But as you can see, these are the notes from the importer, and it gives you a lot of what this is about. And a lot of we covered already. Wash process, 18 days for drying, 1,450 meters. Bourbon Pacas, this is new crop, so it's probably imported around April 2022 from the Santa Ana district. And here's our tasting notes: hazelnut, sweet, chocolate, dark honey, silky body. So dark honey and sweet chocolate, like we're getting some. I think some of the bitterness that we're noticing here could be described as kind of a cacao-ish. Maybe this dark honey, if it's really kind of a harsh honey, that could be something too. But right now, there's definitely a heavy roastiness to it. So what we're going to do is I'm spilling here. I should clean off the logo so that my friend Paula will be happy if I show the logo. She works for the Consejo and controls all exports out of El Salvador now. So it's kind of funny how when you have friends in the business and as time goes by, they rise up in the ranks and now they control they're more in positions of control in the industry. But all right, so we're going to take our 2 spoons. We're going to take 2 cupping spoons now, right? And we're just going to take off the scuzzy part on top of the cup and transfer them in here. So they're out of the way. Basically, what we're trying to do is get all of this muck off the top so that it doesn't occlude our ability to taste. Like, see these little particulates? Like, you don't really want to eat those. You don't want those getting caught in your teeth. That's no fun. All right, good. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So we're just going to wait. So what we're doing is we're kind of like, again, now we're at 8 minutes, 40 seconds, right? So we're actually kind of waiting for about 10 minutes before we actually start to taste the coffee. This allows the coffee to cool down enough so you're not scalding yourself. And especially when you're tasting coffee or just you're tasting in general, you don't want to scald your palate because then you can't taste as effectively. So we like to wait. I tend to, it was 8 minutes a moment ago. I tend to start there. I like starting a little bit hotter than most people, but most industry people want to wait 10 minutes. By that time it's cooled enough that it's a lot more manageable. And here's the thing. So like super, super hot coffee and super, super cold coffee, those extremes, they occlude your palate, the sensitivity of your palate from tasting everything. So you want something more that's kind of more temperate, more tepid in temperature, so that it can your palate and your taste buds can more fully perceive the different flavors and textures in the coffee. So that's really important. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments over here, or if you're watching the replay, drop them in the comments down below. And okay, so we're right at 10 minutes now. So let's get in there and do some tasting. So basically, what we're going to do is we're just going to take our cupping spoon, and right now I'm using these cupping spoons. And this is the cupping spoon, right? This is the profile. It's got a pretty serious dip and a strong angle. I don't always use these. Like, coffee people are very strange, right? Some of the people in the industry, like, they have a coffee cupping spoon, and some of these guys will travel all over the world with their spoon. Like, they have in little cases. They're very precious with it, and they take it with them. And I just kind of look at them, even now, 20 years into the business, I'm still looking at them like, you brought that cupping spoon from home? But that's a little bit strange to me. To me, it's a little bit strange because, normally we use soup spoons, and to me, that's good enough, right? But the cupping spoon is a deeper bowl, so you can get a little bit more liquid. So basically, you're going to have, you grab the elixir. There's a little bit of, I guess this can't be avoided today. And once you get your little sample, you're going to slurp that into your mouth. And the idea is that you're really trying to, and like, it's like a spray, right? Like, imagine like a spray bottle, right? You can get the really straight stream, or you can, adjust it so it's got this wide pattern. And the idea is to spray by sucking and dispersing the coffee, spritzing it across your palate, across the entirety of your mouth. This way you get the maximum amount of exposure to your taste buds, and you're also aerating the coffee to, make it come more alive. So let's try it. Now you see me spitting, and spitting coffee during a tasting like this is pretty typical. What's up, Young Ma? How are you, man? Good to see you. How's everything up there? Good to have you with us. And so what is it? So now I'm losing my thought. Now that we're talking ASMR, I'm kind of losing my thoughts. But anyway, so you're slurping and you're spitting because, especially when you're doing a lot of coffees, like, sometimes you'll do these large cuppings where, like, some of the largest ones I've done, we did 75 cups a day, 75 coffees a day. And those were full critical tasting. So there was 5 samples of each coffee. So 5 times 75. So that was, 300 some or so, some crazy, something like that. 350, 375 cups of coffee that you're tasting. And, when you get to, like, quite a few, and you're just taking this little tiny amount becomes quite a lot of coffee. So we're always spitting because we don't want to have, we don't want to consume too much caffeine, right? And, like in those kind of cuppings, like, you do 300 cups, 350 cups, and you're spitting, but you're still absorbing that caffeine. There's still some of the caffeine you're absorbing, and it is totally, like, you don't feel like, there's times I did not feel very well when we were done. I was like, oh, I really feel like, how you feel when you get too much caffeine? Like, imagine it's like that. That's the kind of thing. So what are we doing? So we're tasting. Now the coffee has really cooled down, so we really can get a lot of the flavors. There's definitely some darker cacao. I would not say that it is the sweet chocolate that they described. It's not terribly sweet. There is, I'd say, medium plus body. but the roasting is really kind of heavy on it. Like it's a pretty dark roast profile on it, so it's a very roasty coffee now. Like you're really getting a lot of roast notes happening. It's kind of rough, like bitters. I mean, it's the nice thing that I'm not tasting defects, right? Like there's no CBB damage, like coffee berry borer, which is the the little parasite that eats through the beans, destroying the structure of the bean. Those have a very distinct, when you have the coffees that have that damage to it, that has very specific tonal qualities, very much like earthy, dirty earth kind of notes. And this is not like that. This is actually a fairly clean coffee that is roasted fairly darkly. Actually, my reaction to this cupping is actually better than the when we did a tasting when I tasted it with Matt earlier a couple hours ago. This coffee was technically roasted really probably about 3 hours ago. So it's really, really fresh. And I think that, pretty much if you could taste coffee pretty well when it comes out of the roaster, like right away, like this within this time frame. And up to tomorrow. After that, it becomes more. Well, it's just that there's the CO2 really starts to occlude the coffee for about a week, and then you can start to taste the flavor again. So that's why we want to taste. You always want to taste your roasting like right away. Either, typically by the next morning, you want to taste your roasted coffee so that you can get the flavor of the coffee and evaluate it before it goes into that dormancy phase because it's being overshadowed by CO2. Youngman wants to know, is it similar with wine tasting? It is very similar as far as the spitting and even as far as the tasting goes. There's a lot of similarities with the wine tasting. Now, wine people probably get upset when coffee people talk like this, but a lot of coffee people say that there are more complex compounds in coffee than wine. So in many respects, theoretically, coffee is much more of a complex beverage than wine. I'm sure that's upsetting some wine people somewhere in the world. And if you look here, you can kind of see that there is a lot of coffee particulates floating around, and they are kind of on my tongue now and then. It's a relatively now it's getting partially it's probably because my palate's getting used to it, and I only have one sample, so I'm only tasting the exact same thing pretty much every time. So I think I'm getting a little bit of palate fatigue on it. So it's feeling more benign now, just less pronounced in everything. It seems like there's a little more of a dark caramel. Like there's a lot of definitely this is an example of the roast profile really domineering, really starting to affect the flavor of it. Like now you're starting to, it's getting, even though it's not terribly, terribly dark, like we're not talking like Starbucks level dark, right? This is a pretty, city plus probably. And it's definitely to the point though where the roast profile is starting to show through in the cup and overtake the natural flavors. And here's the interesting thing. So the importer rated this as an 86.5, and I think that's a bit optimistic. I'd probably say without the roast profile part of it, I would probably say like 84, 83, 84, maybe 84.5, 86.5. I don't know. Maybe I have to try it better. One of the things also to consider if you're planning on doing your own like green sourcing, like if you want to call Sweet Maria's, and if you're a home roaster and you're like, hey, I'm calling Sweet Maria's, can you send me some coffee? Do a small batch and do a taste of it. And so if you want to do this kind of critical cupping where you're really trying to taste and see if the coffee has defects, one thing to consider is doing more of a cupping roast profile. And so the cupping profiles are a little bit different than your production roasting, right? So let us have a look here at our roast profile again. So this is the roast profile for this coffee, right? And as you can see here, the brown layer, the brown line is the actual roast profile. We'll just kind of ignore the rest of it. And the brown line, as we can see, we're at first crack, and then first crack happened right around 6:05, right? And he runs it for 2 more minutes to 8 minutes. And that's a pretty long time to run your coffee. Now, I don't know when I guess the Alirio, from my understanding, the Alirio will note when the first crack starts. I tend to take a relatively lighter roast profile if I really want to cup it. So once first crack finishes, once you stop hearing the popping, that's kind of when you want to bring your roast profile to a halt. And then you want to stop there. So as the popping stops, you can maybe push it out another 10 seconds, maybe 15. You could go to 20. You really want to be on your trier to see how much darkness, how much roast you're putting on it. But you want a relatively light roast that you can really, and why do you want that? So you want that for critical tasting of coffee, because that lighter roast will leave any kind of defect more readily apparent in the cup, right? Right now, as we've talked about, we're tasting this coffee, but there's definitely a roastiness to it. Like, you can taste the roastiness. And that roastiness can be hiding some of the defects that perhaps might be there, right? So you don't want to roast this kind of darkness while if you're really critically tasting your coffee. Now Matt was doing something a little bit different. He's just trying to, mimic his production roast profile. So you could do whatever you want. It's really wide open, but whatever helps you to evaluate the coffee best. A lot of times I'll roast some coffees to a production, like right around the production level, just so that I want to taste what it's going to taste like for the customers, for our guests. And so, there's many ways to do it, but if you really want to do a critical tasting of the coffee where you want to reveal as much problems as you can, then the lighter roast just after first crack is where you want to start. All right, then. So this coffee, the Monte Verde from El Salvador, I'd say 84. Not bad. Like, especially if we get rid of this roasting. Like, that roasting is a bit unpleasant. Like, this coffee doesn't react well to the darker roasting. Like, it's the kind of coffee that, that we're starting to get into the territory where even I would start to think about, maybe I should add some milk or sugar to this, just to this is the kind of thing I would drink at like a diner, right? Like, it's got that darkness, it's got that kind of, flavor profile that just kind of like not so alive, just kind of, it tastes like coffee, tastes like roasted coffee, or it tastes like roasty coffee. And, maybe at this point, I'd probably, be great with pancakes and, eggs and ham and some syrup and butter, and you get your milk and sugar, or if you have a waffle, that'd be kind of awesome with that, that kind of, this is that kind of coffee. Another thing, if you ever want to, do cupping with other people and you want to mimic and really kind of be one of the cool kids in the business, like you want to emulate those cool coffee cuppers, try to get this high pitched like bird whistle as you're doing your I don't know how to do it. I don't do it. But some people have this kind of like, literally, as they're slurping, it's like I've always been like, I've always kind of been fascinated by this. Like, what's wrong with these guys, right? And so I remember one of my friends does that. I can't remember who it is, but we were out traveling one time, cupping, and I said, "Hey, man, do you practice that stuff?" And he was like, "Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I do. I do." So if you really want to be a cool cupper, you want to be able to practice that. And I'm sure there has to be somebody that has a video about that somewhere on the internet. Actually, what I was thinking about doing at some point is, maybe it'll probably take 2 years to make or more longer. Like as I'm going around traveling and cupping with people, maybe I'll just whip out the camera and be like, and just record them like making that noise, and then eventually I'll have enough samples of it so I can just kind of put together a parody video about that. Well, who knows? Whatever the case may be. Anyway, that's pretty much it for me today. That's the wash coffee from Monte Verde. It's roasted by Matt. This was what he was trying to, he was thinking about buying the coffee and he wanted to roast it up, and he put a little bit too heavy a roast on it. And I think that kind of, gives you some negative vibes about it. It's probably a nice coffee overall without the heavy roastiness. But this is just, if you look through the video, this is kind of what you kind of do as you're trying to figure out what coffee do we like to use for our needs, whether you're a commercial roaster that needs it for your program for different aspects, or you're just a home roaster, home user that just like, hey, I need to find a coffee that I really like for my use. This is kind of one way to do it. And this is kind of, the more critical way to evaluate it. And so, if you want, there's also the SCA or Q grading score sheets. You can download those, and they have 10 different categories that you can evaluate the coffee with. They cover fragrance, aroma, taste, flavor, or flavor is taste, balance, body, acidity, sweetness, a lot of different things. And you can actually assign scores to that and then come up with a score that you want. The importer said this was 86.5. I think it's probably more like an 84. Is that really a tremendous difference? Yes and no. It's the difference in score is very narrow, but those 2.5 points in the score can also become dramatically different as far as the way that people want to price it. So, it is something to consider, right? Like coffees that score above 85, 86, and into 87 plus, they tend to want to put more heavier premiums on that. So you just want to be aware of that. And this is where, when you get your coffee, you taste it like this, and you get your coffee, you're like, of course the importer is always telling you, oh man, this is the best coffee in the world. You do this, and then you can evaluate for yourself if it's the best coffee in the world, or if it's just a nice coffee that you're willing to spend this much money on. Well, I hope that helps. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below. Let me know what you think. I'm interested to know if you're doing any kind of work with coffee and trying to figure it out. I'm interested to know your approach. So drop those down in the comments below, and I'll be sure to answer them. And thank you very much for spending the time with me. I know it's been a little bit of a longer live stream than we normally do for these coffee Q&As, but great to have you with me. Thank you very much, and catch you next time. Have a great one.